there is that reaction that you get, especially if you already have a negative opinion of him. And in general, I mean, we know that style of play, we could say it doesn't make for playoff success, but there's also this world where, they don't miss 27 straight threes against the Warriors and they beat the Warriors. Who knows if they beat the Cavs in the finals? I would give them a good chance with the team that they had. I mean, you look back, that team was stacked, and obviously he's the best player on that team. So I don't know if I think the evidence shows that style of play eventually doesn't work, but there's also the argument that he is such a unique player in NBA history because he has that combination of size and athleticism and skill that we rarely see, right? I mean, the closest comparison is like Luka with that same approach of that. They call it like the heliocentric offense where everything is flowing through him.
Yeah.
But I think even he was better at drawing the contact, better at drawing the fouls, even better at maybe distributing than Luka was, because he's still got these other guys involved, Ariza, PJ Tucker, Chris Paul, whatever it is. So maybe he's just such a unicorn, and I don't want to use that word in his favor, but maybe he's just so unique that it could have worked on that team. They just happened to run into one of the greatest teams of all time. Am I giving him too much credit?
Maybe a little too much. Maybe,
Okay.
maybe. But it's fair, right? I think, like you said, right, his style of play is so unique. Like we don't. You go back in NBA history, you can't even find a comp for Harden, right? Like you're like, is he Iverson? Is he Paul Pierce? Is he who is he, right? Because he brings all elements of those guys, right? And you're like, it's hard to put a finger on who is Harden, right? In terms of his style of play. You could say some of his game is Iverson, some of his game is Paul Pierce. You could see a little Kobe in his game. You could see a little, Chris Paul in his game. So he brings all of that to the table. It's just that he's his playing style is unique, and he's a unique personality, and at some point it caught up to him and it got too much for him, right? Because how much beating can you take? How much beating can your body take in the NBA? Like if you're averaging 15 free throws a game, how much is your body taking, right, to get to
Yeah.
those 15 free throws a game? He's getting beat up year in and year out, and at some point, and we see this now with him, it's caught up, right? He can't do that anymore. He can't, and that's like half his game is gone, right? Because he was predicated on getting that contact, and his body's just so beat up. It's hard for him. I mean, he can still do it but he's not getting those 15 free throws a game
Yeah.
anymore. So I think it took a toll on him physically, mentally, to kind of play that way and not win. And that's kind of where we see the nosedive start to happen.
Yeah. And I think, even if you are getting to the line, 10, 15 times a game, and some of them are exaggerated contact, we'll say, you're still getting contact, you're still putting your body on the line, you're still going into the paint, and like you said, that thing that does add up. So I think aside from those Warriors series where you could say that, they definitely ran into the superior team, he has gained a reputation of being a playoff choker. And I want to discuss a little bit of how fair you think that is. I think the casual immediate response is, yeah, he chokes in the playoffs. What do you think? Is that a fair label to put on him?
I don't think so. Only because look at the talent he was working with for most of his Rockets career. Like, who was the second best player once they traded Chris? Like once they had Chris Paul, right, for a year or two. But
And then it was Russell Westbrook, right?
and
He
Russ,
was the best player,
Russ was garbage. But like that's what I'm saying. Like, can you name like Harden's number two? Like you go down these other teams, you're like, yeah, LeBron's number two was Bosh, K Love, right? He has these guys, Dwayne Wade. Steph had Clay, Steph has Draymond, Steph had, you can name other guys as like number two, number threes. When I think of Harden, I'm like, man, he had CP3 for a year, he had Westbrook for a year. That's the best he got. Like no one else comes to mind that's like, oh wow, this was like an amazing other player he played with. So I think it's a little unfair to label him that just because he was working with so much less talent than I would say the other teams, and he was elevating the talent around him per se, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you look at the Rockets team on paper before the season starts with Chris Paul and Harden, you're like, this could maybe work, but we don't know. Are they top 5 in the West? Like that's what everyone was thinking at that time before the season starts. And then they show, Chris Paul and Harden could kind of make it work and they kind of get it going. But I really can't say like did Harden have a lot of help, right? Like these other guys
Hmm.
had, and it doesn't matter how
Yeah.
the talent came, right? They didn't. No one wanted to sign to Houston. Houston was just bad at drafting at that point. Like they have like Jeremy Lamb in there, like that was their big. Sorry, they like bring Jeremy Lamb back, Jeremy Lin, like these guys, like no name players that doesn't really matter, right? Like around Harden, guys that didn't really help him, and they
Hmm.
didn't, and I don't think they surrounded him with enough talent, so it's
Yeah.
hard to call him a playoff joker.
I think he is. Just to say
Okay,
it.
go ahead,
Just,
say
I
it. Let
think
me know, let me know.
yeah, I think what a lot of people point to is, his record in his records or whatever in game sevens and in elimination games. He had that famous, was it game seven against the Rockets, or sorry, against the Spurs, where he was like 2 for 15 or something. Supposedly he had a concussion in the game before, and that's why he struggled. We look at last year, he had two chances to eliminate the Boston Celtics. And the thing is, it's not like he's awful in the playoffs, because he's good until it really matters, right? And I think that's the point, is for some reason, this guy, when the going gets really tough, because sure, you can be incredible in the regular season. You can average 34 points a game, win an MVP. No one is saying you're not a great player, because what are the stakes in the regular season? They're not that high. What are the stakes in a game one, game two, game three, game four, whatever it is, right? They're high, but it's not when all the chips are down. If you remember, there's a couple things that come to mind. One was that incredible comeback in game seven, or was it game six, from by the Rockets against the Clippers? Was it Josh Smith and Corey Brewer, I believe, were the two guys that went crazy?
Yeah, yes, that's right.
Where was James Harden? James Harden was on the
He
bench. He had nothing to
he
do
was
with
tired,
that.
man. He was tired. He's
Sure, but
tired
he had
from.
nothing to do with that incredible comeback, and
Yeah, that's
he had
true.
nothing
That's
to do with
fair.
that.
That's
And
fair.
there was a couple other opportunities that he had during the playoffs, with the Sixers. With the Nets one is a little bit more complicated, because I do remember giving him a lot of credit. I think he had a hamstring injury and he was more of a decoy than anything else. So we'll get to Brooklyn and all that, but I just think that he's good enough to get you. Obviously, he made two conference finals trips in his time with the Rockets, so he is a great player. But again, in those elimination games, those game sixes, game sevens, because they were up 3-2 on the Warriors. They could have won in six, and they didn't. They could have won in seven, and they didn't. So we can give him credit for taking the Rockets as far as he did. But if you're the best player on that team, you're going to get a lot of criticism as well. So I think, again, sure, he's one of the greatest scoring guards of all time. He's a magician. You can run your offense through him. You can do whatever. But when the chips are down, I think he's one of like the last guys that I would pick out of like the superstar all NBA type players.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, a lot of it is like he just like we said, right? He gets beat up. He's tired. Like you get into if he's getting you to a game seven with the surrounding cast of like Clint Capella and like you know like Clint Capella is the second best player and like Trevor Ariza. Like these are the guys he's playing with, and he's getting to a game seven. I think maybe it's a
Maybe
little
he's not
unfair
in
to
good
say him.
shape. Maybe that's another thing.
Maybe. I mean, that's been a knock on him for sure. But I think it's hard. It's hard to be that. It's hard to be the guy all the time, right? And you see that, right? Like people had that same criticism of Steph until he finally won Finals MVP, right? People are like, oh, but Steph has so much talent around him. But Steph is the guy. Like he'll do it. But I think he gets helped out a little bit by the fact that he has Draymond there to kind of orchestrate the offense. He has Clay there when he's kind of in a slump, right? So Steph can take moments off. Harden can't, and when Harden does, the team crashes, right? That's what it is, right? And
But
unfortunately, he's been taking the moments off in the biggest
yeah.
games. But I think
So
it's
to
he's
that
his
point,
effort to get to those
yeah.
games. He's just so tired by the time he gets to those games. Like I think that's part of it.
But
Part
to
of it,
that
not
point,
all of it.
I will say it's by design.
Yeah,
If
100%. It is by design. I mean,
he wants the ball in his hands all the time. He's not willing to work off the ball. When he doesn't have the ball in a possession. I mean, you saw it
he
in
doesn't
Philly.
try. Yeah, he doesn't
Yeah,
try.
he's not trying, right? I
Yep.
mean, you can say, oh, maybe he's resting, getting some energy back, whatever. But it's like you are operating in an offense that is, you know, 90% James Harden, and
Yeah.
that's because
Yeah.
that's how he
Exactly.
wants to play.
Exactly right. It is 100% by design, right? So if that's your style of play and that's who you want to beat, then you better be in damn good shape and finish those game sevens.
Exactly. And he wasn't. And he never has been, whether it's a mental block, whether it's a physical block. He's had opportunities to overcome that label. Personally, if he beats Boston last year, because he was incredible for most of that series, but again, he had a chance to do that and beat a great Boston team, and he didn't. Once again, he fell short in that
Wasn't
crucial
Embiid
moment.
hurt? Embiid was hurt, right?
Oh, Embiid came back in
He came back. He
in
came back, and they
early
still
on in that
lost.
series. Yeah, it was all Harden. He went crazy in game one.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
won
Early
game
on, it
one in
was all
Boston.
Harden.
Yeah, and that's the thing is he's capable of these things. But you can say, "Oh, he's tired. He's this and that." It's like, well, everybody's tired, man. It's game
Yeah,
seven.
for sure.
That's the
Everyone's
whole
tired at
point.
that point.
Everybody's
I mean,
tired. Everybody's hurt.
I think it was disappointing both from him and Embiid. Like neither one of them kind of no showed in that game seven, right? Like, I mean, Embiid was that the game he put a Embiid showed up in like game six, I think, right, where he
I think it
dropped
was
like a
game
50
four,
point
game five. I mean, they both
something
had a
like that.
chance.
Embiid, they both had
You,
chances, but like I feel both of them no showed in game seven for whatever reason.
yeah,
But
I mean, Embiid is not innocent here, but I think
yeah,
this is a James Harden podcast.
this is a James Harden pod.
We're
Yeah,
talking about James Harden.
let's get to the juicy stuff, man.